So many of you have asked me to make a video talking about my biggest book recommendations, and I'm so pumped to be doing it finally because I'm very passionate about sharing what I believe are life-changing books with people, and I feel like I annoy my friends like hyping up books so hard to them and being like, no, you have to read this book, like cannot stress this enough, this will change your life.
Zelf.
On the shelf.
Seriously, every single one of the books on this list that I made, which was quite hard to compile because there's a lot of good books out there, has legitimately changed my life. Like, I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for these books. And I mean that in the fullest sense of that. Like, my personality is different because of these books. Yeah, they've all changed my life so much, that's all I can say. So I hope you'll watch to the end. I hope that I will inspire you to order at least one of these books. I will leave every book linked in the description box with my Amazon affiliate code. So if you want to support me in making these videos, a little way you can do that is by ordering through that link. Or if you're better than me and you don't support Jeff Bezos, then seriously good for you, like I applaud you. So the first book on my list is not going to come as any surprise to a lot of you who have been following me for a while. It is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. This book is a lot of people's favorite. Like, everyone who's read it seems to rave about it. Barack Obama raved about it. How do I begin to explain what it is? It's a brief history of humankind. It talks about how we went from being, you know, this random ape species in Africa to, you know, 2020 modern industrialized world humans, and it's mind-blowing. Like, it will just shatter your perception of reality in so many ways. It will seriously make you question so much about your life and like what you think you know. You'll just be amazed at like how ignorant you are, to be honest. Like, I felt like I had a decent understanding of evolution before I read this book. I didn't. I knew nothing. It's so good. It's insane that so many of us don't understand ourselves. Like, we don't understand our own species, which is crazy because the information is out there, and to me it doesn't make any logical sense not to find and consume that information, because, like, you know, just learning about why we act the way that we do, why we think the way that we do, all that kind of stuff is so important for being able to sort of have more control over our lives and be able to sort of be more of an active participant in our lives and not just get like led along by whatever forces of, like, you know, oppressing on us or whatever. So I cannot recommend Sapiens enough. I feel like, especially if you've just left the Mormon church, it's such an important read because growing up in Mormonism, you don't learn about, oh, hair on my camera. Do you even learn about evolution? I mean, kind of. Like, I did a BYU Idaho class that was like about evolution, and it was like, we're not saying it's definitely real, but we're not saying it's not. Like, they just try and like toe the line. It's weird. Anyway, please read Sapiens. I cannot stress this enough. I feel like it's the Bible for our species. I don't think anyone should go through life not having read it, because I don't think any of us should go through life not understanding ourselves. And this is such a good, comprehensive way to understand our species. Like, can't recommend it enough. Please read it. Hope I've done a good enough job convincing you with this passionate monologue. So the second book on my list is also another one that Barack Obama recommended. And it's called Educated, and it's by Tara Westover, and it's a true story about this girl who grew up Mormon in rural Idaho, and she grew up as the kind of Mormon that was like, don't trust doctors, like very conspiracy theory, like not necessarily like the mainstream Mormon that we're used to seeing in like Utah County. I don't want to give too much away, but her story is just insane and also incredibly inspiring. This was a book that I couldn't put down because it's gripping. Like, I didn't want to go to sleep. I finished it in about 2 days, and it's so good. Like, I'm jealous of people that haven't read it because it's that good. Yeah, read it. And obviously it's particularly relevant for a Mormon, ex-Mormon audience, so I think you guys are gonna love it. Again, can't recommend it enough. The third book on my list is called When the Body Says No, Exploring the Stress-Disease Connection. Now, this book I put in my bag when I flew home to England over Christmas, and I was flying back and I just had finished whatever book I was reading before. So I started reading this book on the plane on this 10-hour flight, and I read the entire thing on the flight because it was so good. It was so fascinating. It's basically about the impact that trauma has on our bodies, and there are just some absolutely fascinating things. The whole book is fascinating, hence why I couldn't put it down. And just so you know, I'm not, like, I read, but I wouldn't say I'm like a voracious reader who would typically read for 10 hours straight on a flight. Yeah, basically it just talks about how trauma is intergenerational, you know, it gets passed down through families, and as a result, a lot of, you know, autoimmune diseases and cancer and things like that are the result of trauma. You have to read it to, you know, sort of really understand it, but it's just such a good look at you know, how trauma affects us. And there's also some like quite hopeful stuff in there. Like for me personally, I've always been kind of afraid of cancer. Who isn't? And you know, people in my family have had cancer, but reading this book, it really made me feel kind of more confident that I might not get cancer, because you know, a big thing for our bodies is whether we're listening to our emotions and whether we've healed our trauma. And if we are, we're in a lot better position to not get cancer. So I'm just gonna say that for now, because I don't want this video to be too long, but it's really, really good. Anyone who's interested in trauma and mental health and physical health, you'll love it. It's really good. The fourth and fifth book on this list, I'm kind of talking about them together because they're very similar. They're both by a guy called Eckhart Tolle, who is a German sort of, I guess you would call him a New Age spiritual teacher. But the concepts that he talks about, I mean, like New Age gets a bad rep, right? But basically the things he's talking about are things that spiritual teachers throughout history have talked about, like Jesus and the Buddha and all kinds of people. It's basically about being present. It's something that we hear a lot, especially with like the rise of mindfulness sort of in pop culture. I don't know, I feel like it's on Instagram a lot. But it's something that like doesn't necessarily mean anything unless you've dived into what it means. These books, I'm like a little bit hesitant to recommend to ex-Mormons, because when I read The Power of, have I even said the books? It's The Power of Now and A New Earth are the two books. I read The Power of Now first and then A New Earth second, which I think is the right order to read them in. I would recommend you do the same. And when I started reading The Power of Now, I was definitely a little bit skeptical because he uses quite mystical language at times, and obviously like after leaving a high demand religion, like a lot of you can probably relate, you don't want anything to do with that. You're like, I don't want any woo-woo, I don't want any spiritual bullshit. So I was a little bit skeptical, but the more I kept reading, the more I realized that like these were words that were pointing to truths that I needed to hear. And The Power of Now kind of has a question and answer format, so a lot of my sort of skeptical questions did kind of get addressed. So if you're into like mindfulness, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, and you haven't read these books, I really do recommend it. And I also, I guess, want to give the caveat that they're not for everyone, and you might pick it up and start reading it and be like, this is gobbledygook, this means nothing. And I feel like if you're in that position, then like don't try and read it. Like I feel like if I would have found these books even a year before I did, they would have been like kind of meaningless to me and I just wouldn't have been into them. So it's just one of those things where it's like, they'll resonate with some people and for others they won't. The next book on my list is called Inner Bonding by Margaret Paul, and this is a book that was written in 1992, the year I was born. And my friend Kelly, who's extremely oh my god, she's actually been in a video on Zelf about nonviolent communication, but me and her love talking about psychology and mindfulness together, and she begged me to read this book because she read it after her divorce and was like, Sam, like I've learned so much from this book, like it's mind-blowing. So I was like, yeah, I'll read it. And then I read it and I was like, oh my god, yeah, everyone needs to read this, it's so good. It's basically explaining the concept of reparenting yourself, which is the idea that, you know, within us, within all of us, there still exists the version of us that we were when we were kids. Like we can obviously all still, for the most part, remember what it was like to be a kid. That part of us doesn't die, and so much of who we are and how we form relationships and attachments and move through the world is sort of rooted in how we were treated as children and how secure we felt in our relationships with our parents and other important people in our life as children. So this book is seriously like it's so groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking for me. It kind of explains the concept of sort of listening to your inner child, which is something that might sound woo-woo, but isn't at all. If you're struggling with relationships in any area of your life, you need to read this book. The codependency video that I made was almost basically entirely informed by this book. It completely transformed my view of relationships. My romantic relationship is so good, and I seriously owe so much of that to Margaret Paul. Like she has just transformed my understanding, made me a happier, healthier, better person. Another reason I think it's great for ex-Mormons is because a lot of you are dealing with, you know, stuff related to your parents and family members who are still Mormon. And a lot of you are also probably processing a lot of stuff that sort of happened to you growing up in the church and with your parents that wasn't healthy and that has kind of affected you negatively to this day. And this is such a great resource for navigating that. Why is my battery dying? This makes no sense. The next book, I've been wanting to tell you guys about this book for so long. I almost made like a whole video about it, but I just never got around to it. It's called Come As You Are, and anyone, any woman or any person who's attracted to women and, you know, dates women, has a sexual relationship with women, needs to read this book. It's got a reputation for being like the sex book for women, and it has rightly earned that reputation. I read it last summer when I was in LA. Like, I felt like someone who's pretty clued up on, you know, sex and health in that area, but like there was so many things I learned in that book that I was like, whoa, I've never thought of that before. Like, to give a little example, our society views sexual desire as something that should be spontaneous. You know, like, we've all seen movies where the people just like knock everything off the desk and like, you know, tear each other's clothes off. And that is typically a very male way of approaching sex, because actually spontaneous desire, like sexual desire that is just kind of like boom, instant, throw everything on the desk, is kind of the norm for men. But the norm for women, and this isn't like true for everyone in both genders, obviously, like there's a whole spectrum, but it's typically true for each gender. With women, their desire style is usually responsive, which means that it has to build slowly. And so there's so many women in society who feel like, oh, I don't have like enough of a sex drive, or I don't want to have sex as much as my husband does, whatever. And it's just like those differences in desire styles, and they don't understand that. So they think like, oh, I'm not sexual enough, or I don't have a good sex drive. And actually there's probably nothing wrong with a lot of those women's sex drives. It's just that they've been conditioned to think that sexual desire should be spontaneous, and in the book she calls it the men as default myth, which is just a really useful phrase. So that's just one little example of like kind of the mind-blowing things in that book. If you're a woman or someone who dates women, cannot stress enough how much you should read this book. It's a must read, it's essential reading, seriously. And especially if you're leaving a high demand religion, and which obviously didn't teach you like the healthiest ideas about sex, it's gonna help you so much. Any sort of sexual dysfunction that you might feel that you're experiencing, you'll read this book and realize like, wait, I'm normal. And that is like, you know, so powerful. So can't recommend that one enough. I feel like a broken record already. The next two books, again, it's kind of like an Eckhart Tolle thing where an author has written two books that I really love and I couldn't choose between them. They're books by Dr. Michael Greger, who is a vegan nutritionist. He's a doctor. And his books that I love are called How Not to Die and How Not to Diet. How Not to Die I read years ago when I was first going vegan, and it's basically just about the power of plants to, you know, help us be healthy, help us prevent and cure diseases. It's just really amazing. If you're interested in nutrition, it's just basically, both of these books are just like study after study after study after study. Like, it's so jam-packed with good information. How Not to Diet is more focused on weight loss. You know, I don't need to lose weight. I didn't read it to like learn how to lose weight, but I love Michael Greger so much, like I'd read anything he put out. It is actually really fascinating whether or not you care about weight loss, because you learn a lot about the nutrition industry and the food industry and how corrupt things are in America. Like, it's gonna blow your mind how disgustingly corrupt the food industry is in this country and how much it's affecting people. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, I highly recommend. But I would recommend listening to the audio versions of them, just because they are quite dense scientifically, and Dr. Greger has a really good audio voice, so like he's very interesting to listen to, but I could imagine the information not being as interesting to listen to, or not being as interesting to read. So yeah, if you haven't ever done an Audible free trial, quick plug, if you click the link in the, you know, the Amazon link in the description to that book, and do the free trial, I think I get like $5 for you just starting a trial. Full disclosure, I'd love if you did that. But yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of reading books physically, but for those two, I'd recommend the audio ones. Oh, I'm like breathless because I'm so excited talking about books. The next book is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg, and again, we have a video on our channel about nonviolent communication, so you can go watch that, I'll link it. This is a great book for learning how to communicate. If you are having any kind of contention in your relationships, or like struggling to communicate, especially with like, you know, you've left the Mormon church and you're struggling to communicate with believing parents, things like that, this book is perfect. Like, it's exactly what you need. It's kind of like a whole philosophy beyond just like a communication style. It's game changing. Like, if everyone in the world read this book, like, we would have such a better world, because it just really teaches you how to communicate what you need in a way that never like attacks anyone else, or it's just brilliant. Like, it's the best book on communication I read. I don't even know what else to say about it. It's, yeah, I highly recommend it. The next book on my list is by Tara Brach, who is, Banksy, shh, we're filming. Bernie's like eating his food in the other room, and Banksy's not allowed out there because he just steals his food, and he is going crazy. Come here. Come here. Okay, he might be like just a background feature in this video because I don't think he's going to stop meowing. Next book is True Refuge by Tara Brach. She is a Buddhist mindfulness teacher. As I sort of mentioned before, like I am quite Buddhist and I really love Eastern philosophy, and it's really benefited my life a lot. So this book was right up my alley. But basically, as the name kind of suggests, True Refuge, it's about finding true refuge in life. Like, there are so many ways that we seek false refuge in the stories we tell ourselves and our, you know, addictions to things like stimulation, like phones and TV and food and alcohol and all that stuff. It's basically just a book about healing and a book about being able to confront what's painful to you and heal it, give it, you know. She has another book called Radical Acceptance, which I almost included because they're both so good. But I think I enjoyed this one just a little bit more, so I just figured I'd pick one. If you're into Buddhism and mindfulness and healing and all that stuff, you'll love it. She's amazing. I read a ton of books in that vein, in that genre, and this I think was the most impactful for me. She outlines like methods for coping with difficult emotions that are just so much better than I've heard anywhere else. Like she's also a certified, is it psychotherapist? I don't know like all the terms for therapy, but she's like a trained psychology professional. I don't know what type of therapist. Is it psychotherapist? I'm being dumb. So she kind of brings that sort of Western, you know, professional approach to the Eastern mindfulness Buddhist sort of way, and combines them all so beautifully and in such a perfect way. And it is my opinion that we really need a combination of like Eastern and Western approaches to heal as societies and as individuals. So just love this book. Last book on my list is kind of just like a short, cute one, but I wanted to include it because I didn't necessarily read it at a time in my life where I needed it. I don't know. It's called Reasons to Stay Alive. It's by Matt Haig. He's British, I believe. He's a fun, very like easy to read writer. And this book, Reasons to Stay Alive, is just him talking about his journey from being suicidally depressed and almost committing suicide to, you know, refinding this zest for life. And I think this is a book that if I would have read a few years earlier when I was more depressed and needed it more, like just could have been an absolute game changer for me. Like it was a game changer. I really did enjoy it and found a lot of value in it, but I think you know, it has even more power to change lives if people find it at the right time. So if you are struggling with depression and, you know, suicidal ideation maybe, then I really recommend it. It's really lovely. And even if you don't suffer with depression, it's just a lovely read. Like it really gives you a good insight into what, you know, severe depression looks like and how people get suicidal, and then also how to come back from that, which I love because I feel like so much talk about depression is sort of almost focused around like you'll never get better. Like it feels like there's a lot of messaging like that when people talk about depression, like it will never really go away. And like, it's not like he's saying like, yeah, it'll go away and you'll be fixed, but like it's just a very hopeful read. It's like much more inspiring and positive than a lot of accounts of depression can be. Like it doesn't just have like a somber ending. He really has like learned so much about depression. I'm all about healing and self-healing, and I think there are so many more resources available to us for healing than a lot of us have been aware of historically or are aware of. So I love a good like healing story. It's a quick read. I think I read it in about 3 days. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that I inspired you to order some new books. We're in quarantine. There's no better time to be reading, right? I think a lot of the books I recommended are also valuable at this time when a lot of people are stressed and anxious and probably in need of some healing. I feel like all the books I tend to love and gravitate towards are in that vein. So I really hope that you order some of these books and read them. Let me know if you do, and let me know if you've read any of them, obviously. Also, let me know what books have changed your life. I'm always looking for great new books. I just ordered Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, which I know is like a big favorite of a lot of people. It's about creativity. I've been meaning to read it for ages, but I just watched her little interview she did with Russell Brand and I was sold, so I ordered it right away after that interview. So tell me what books have changed your life. I really want to know. And yeah, hope you're all having a good time in quarantine. I hope you're all doing okay, you're safe, you're healthy. If you want to support our channel, we have a Patreon. I'll leave that in the description box as always. And yeah, I really appreciate you showing up and watching this video and listening to me, because you don't have to, and I'm seriously honored that you would be interested in the books I want to recommend. Like, that's so cool. So see ya, bye.